It's 1947. A young Russian engineer sits in a workshop surrounded by captured German weapons, shell casings, and scrap metal. His name is Mikhail Kalashnikov, and he's about to design the rifle that would arm more people than any other gun in history. But this isn't a story about a weapon. It's about how desperation, ingenuity, and one man's refusal to quit created something that would reshape warfare for the next 70 years. So, if you want to see how a single design ended up in the hands of armies, rebels, and fighters across nearly every corner of the globe, hit subscribe and let's dive into the story of the AK-47. The story doesn't begin in Moscow. It begins on a Soviet tank in 1941 when the Wehrmacht's invasion nearly destroyed Russia entirely. Mikhail Kalashnikov was a tank mechanic, not a gunsmith, not an engineer with formal training. He was a working man who understood machines. When his tank was hit by German artillery, Kalashnikov was badly injured. During his recovery in the hospital, he overheard soldiers talking about their rifles. The conversations were grim. Soviet infantry were being slaughtered by better-equipped German forces. The Mosin Nagant, Russia's standard rifle since 1891, was a masterpiece of 19th-century engineering. It was tough, reliable, and accurate. But it was also slow. Soldiers had to manually work the bolt between each shot. Against German troops with faster weapons, Soviet riflemen were at a disadvantage that no amount of courage could overcome. Kalashnikov became obsessed. While still recovering from his wounds, he began sketching designs for a semi-automatic rifle. He had no formal education in weapons design. He had no laboratory. He had only his intuition about how machines worked and an burning conviction that he could build something better. When Kalashnikov was discharged from the hospital, he didn't return to being a tank mechanic. He entered a design competition being held by the Soviet military. Hundreds of engineers submitted proposals. The competition would produce the rifle that would become the standard for the entire Soviet army. Kalashnikov's early designs were rejected. He failed repeatedly. Each rejection fueled him further. He studied captured German weapons. He visited battlefields where fighting had ceased to examine spent ammunition and damaged guns. He interviewed soldiers about what they needed. He absorbed everything. By 1946, after 5 years of obsession, Kalashnikov had refined his vision. He created a rifle that was conceptually different from anything that had come before. It wasn't revolutionary in any single feature. Instead, it was revolutionary in how all the features worked together. Where other designs tried to be precise and delicate, Kalashnikov's rifle was deliberately loose. It had massive tolerances. Parts that would be machined to perfection in American or German factories were rough and simple in his design. A single part could be produced by an unskilled worker using basic machinery. It didn't need precision. It needed to work. The rifle was robust. It could function in extreme cold. It could handle sand, mud, and saltwater spray without jamming. It wasn't the most accurate rifle ever made. It wasn't the fastest firing rifle ever made. But it was possibly the most reliable rifle ever made. And reliability, it turned out, mattered more than anything else. The gas system was simple. When a round fired, expanding gases pushed a piston backward. The piston then unlocked the bolt and cycled it back, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. The system was crude compared to other designs, but it was genius because it was crude. It worked when it should have failed. It kept working when everything around it was falling apart. The magazine was a curved steel box that held 30 rounds. The ammunition itself was a mid-power cartridge that sat between the full-power rifle rounds of previous generations and the lighter intermediate rounds being experimented with. It was the Goldilocks choice, powerful enough to be deadly at range, but controllable enough for sustained fire. The gun had a simple gas tube running along the top. An operator could adjust it for different conditions or to compensate for fouling. Everything about the design said, "This is a weapon built to survive." In 1949, the Soviet military officially adopted Kalashnikov's rifle as the Avtomat Kalashnikova, 1947 model, the AK-47. The name itself was humble. It didn't glorify its creator or make grand claims. It simply stated what it was, an automatic rifle designed by Kalashnikov in 1947. But what happened next was extraordinary. The rifle didn't just become the standard for Soviet forces. It became the template for dozens of other nations. China manufactured copies. East Germany produced their own version. North Korea, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Every Soviet-aligned nation adapted the design for their own arsenals. Each country tweaked it slightly for their own manufacturing capabilities, but the core design remained unchanged. Kalashnikov had created something so fundamentally sound that it transcended borders, ideologies, and decades of technological advancement. By the 1950s, the Cold War was transforming global conflict. For decades, wars had been fought primarily between industrialized nations with massive armies and complex logistics. But now, insurgencies and liberation movements were emerging across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These weren't wealthy countries with advanced manufacturing. They were struggling nations where soldiers might not have formal training and equipment, had to withstand harsh climates and years of hard use without maintenance. The AK-47 was perfect for this new world. A peasant farmer could learn to operate one in minutes. A unit without access to gunsmiths could keep it running for years. An army without factories could hand-repair damaged components using basic tools. While Western nations were designing rifles that required trained armorers and sophisticated maintenance, the Soviet Union had created something that could function in conditions where American guns would fail. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers who carried the AK-47 developed trust in their weapon that bordered on devotion. It didn't jam at critical moments. It didn't fall apart under stress. It just worked. Reliability in combat isn't just a practical advantage. It's a spiritual one. A soldier who believes their rifle will function is a more effective fighter than one who harbors doubts. Throughout the Cold War, the AK-47 became a symbol. It appeared in the hands of Soviet soldiers, Cuban revolutionaries, Vietnamese guerrillas, and African liberation movements. Western observers watched with growing concern as the rifle spread to every conflict zone on the planet. American military planners initially dismissed it as crude and inaccurate. But they misunderstood Kalashnikov's philosophy. The gun wasn't designed to win precision competitions. It was designed to win wars where soldiers couldn't rely on perfect conditions. In the jungles of Vietnam, American soldiers with their sophisticated M16 rifles sometimes found themselves outgunned by North Vietnamese troops armed with AK-47s. The American rifles were more accurate at long range, but the jungle rarely offered long-range engagements. In the thick vegetation where most fighting occurred, reliability mattered more than precision. An American rifle that jammed in humid conditions was worse than useless. An AK-47 that kept firing became a decisive advantage. By the 1970s, the AK-47 had achieved something unprecedented. It had become the most widely manufactured rifle in human history. More copies of the AK design existed than all other rifle designs combined. In factories across the Soviet bloc, in China, and in underground workshops in a dozen other countries, workers were producing rifles based on Kalashnikov's design. Some were official military contracts. Others were unauthorized copies produced for black markets and insurgent groups. What's remarkable is that despite coming from so many different manufacturers, most of these rifles were interchangeable. A magazine from one factory would work in a rifle made by another. A piston from one country would function in the receiver of another. Kalashnikov's design had become so fundamental that it created a universal standard. Armies that would never cooperate could still share ammunition. Fighters from different nations could use whatever guns they could obtain because they were all variations on the same theme. But the real revolution wasn't military, it was cultural. The AK-47 became a symbol of resistance. In the hands of Cuban revolutionaries fighting Batista's regime, it represented the triumph of the people against oppression. In Africa, it became the tool of liberation movements throwing off colonial rule. In the Middle East, it transformed conflicts between state armies and irregular forces. A small band of determined fighters armed with AK-47s could now challenge a conventional army in ways that had never been possible before. This democratization of firepower changed warfare fundamentally. For the first time in history, a rifle so reliable, so simple, and so widely available that it could be produced in almost any country became the standard small arm of global conflict. Expensive training, sophisticated logistics, and advanced manufacturing capabilities were no longer prerequisites for effective military power. A young person with minimal training could operate an AK-47. An untrained militia could maintain these weapons. A developing nation could arm its population with reliable rifles using relatively simple factories. The impact on conventional military strategy was profound. Superpowers that had planned their defense around technological superiority suddenly found themselves facing irregular forces that could sustain themselves indefinitely. A Soviet soldier in Afghanistan faced rebels who couldn't be decisively defeated because their weapons never broke down. An American soldier in Vietnam faced Viet Cong guerrillas who could disappear into the jungle with rifles that never failed them. The AK-47 had made it possible for the weak to resist the strong indefinitely. This wasn't because the AK-47 was the most powerful rifle ever made. American rifles could be more accurate. European rifles could be more sophisticated, but none of them could match the AK-47's combination of reliability, simplicity, and manufacturability. And in the world of actual combat, dusty, muddy, chaotic combat where nothing works the way it's supposed to, those qualities mattered more than raw specifications. Mikhail Kalashnikov himself lived to see his creation transform the world. He became a Soviet hero, honored with medals and recognition. Yet he remained a modest man who understood the true nature of his achievement. He hadn't designed a perfect rifle. He'd designed a rifle that matched the world it would enter. He understood that soldiers in poor countries needed weapons they could maintain, that insurgents needed guns they could produce themselves, that conflicts in jungles and deserts required reliability over precision. In interviews late in his life, Kalashnikov expressed ambivalence about his creation. He was proud of the engineering. He understood that his design had saved lives, that soldiers who trusted their weapons survived more often than soldiers who didn't. But he also recognized that his rifle had armed so many different causes, some of them brutal and unjust. The AK-47 had been used by freedom fighters and by tyrants, by legitimate governments and by terrorist organizations, by professional soldiers and by child soldiers forced into combat. This moral complexity is part of the AK-47's story. Unlike a work of art or literature that can only be experienced as its creator intended, a weapon has no inherent morality. It's a tool that amplifies human intention, whether noble or evil. The AK-47's reliability meant that it could be trusted to function regardless of the cause it served. This made it equally useful to liberation movements and to oppressive regimes, equally valuable to defenders and to aggressors. But from a purely technological standpoint, the AK-47 represents something remarkable. A design so sound that it has remained fundamentally unchanged for over 75 years. Countless variations have been produced. The design has been adapted to fire different cartridges, to accommodate modern accessories, to function in different environments. But the core concept, the tilting bolt, the simple gas piston system, the straightforward controls, remains the same. It's one of the rare instances where a product was so well designed that improvement proved difficult. The reasons for this longevity reveal why the AK-47 was revolutionary. First, the design operated on fundamental mechanical principles rather than cutting-edge technology. There was nothing in the rifle that relied on advanced materials or precision manufacturing. It used conventional springs, steel, and wood. This meant temoyan. Had any nation with basic metalworking capability could produce it. No special factories, no rare materials, no proprietary processes, just skilled workers with basic tools. Second, the rifle embodied a philosophy of tolerance over precision. Most gun designers aimed for tight tolerances, making components fit together with minimal space. This created accuracy, but required skilled machinists and quality control. Kalashnikov did the opposite. His parts fit together loosely. There was significant play between components. This meant that a roughly made part from a poor factory would work just as well as a precisely made one from a quality manufacturer. Tolerance meant reliability. It meant that a gun could be produced by an unskilled worker using a basic machine and still function perfectly. Third, the rifle was designed for field repair. Every component could be disassembled without special tools. A soldier with nothing but a cleaning rod could break down the entire gun, inspect it, and reassemble it. Parts were designed to be simple enough that damaged components could be improvised from available materials. A broken firing pin could be fashioned from a nail. A damaged wooden furniture could be replaced with a piece of tree branch fitted and shaped in the field. This sounds crude, but it meant that an AK-47 could be kept operational almost indefinitely, even in the worst conditions. Fourth, the ammunition standardization. Kalashnikov chose a mid-power cartridge, the 7.62 by 39 mm round. This decision rippled through decades of conflict. Because so many nations adopted the AK-47, they also adopted the same ammunition. This created a universal supply. Soldiers could scavenge ammunition from fallen enemies and use it in their own weapons. Different nations' troops could share ammunition supplies. Over time, the 7.62 by 39 round became as universal as the rifle itself. The effect of this standardization was to create what economists call a network effect. Each new nation that adopted the AK-47 made the rifle more valuable to every other user because ammunition supply became even more accessible. More ammunition manufacturers joined the market because demand was guaranteed. Maintenance and spare parts became easier to find. The rifle became more entrenched as the global standard with each passing year. By the end of the Cold War, the AK-47's supremacy was undisputed. Estimates suggest that 1 in 5 guns on Earth was some variant of Kalashnikov's design. In some regions, the ratio was even higher. In Africa, the AK-47 was so common that it had shaped the economics of armed conflict. Guns were cheaper and more available than formal employment. A young person in a war-torn region was more likely to find an AK-47 than a paying job. This created a troubling paradox. The rifle's very reliability and universal availability made it a driver of conflict rather than simply a tool used by those already committed to violence. When guns are scarce and expensive, only serious military forces and dedicated insurgents can arm themselves. But when reliable rifles are cheap and abundant, they become accessible to criminals, warlords, and despots. The AK-47's success in spreading around the world meant that it had become woven into the fabric of regional conflicts in ways that were difficult to reverse. Yet, from Kalashnikov's perspective, this wasn't a failure of his design. It was a consequence of choosing effectiveness over exclusivity. An American rifle designed to require sophisticated maintenance and factory support would naturally remain concentrated in wealthy, industrialized militaries. But a rifle designed to function anywhere with minimal support would inevitably spread. The question wasn't whether the design was good. It obviously was. The question was whether democratizing firepower was ultimately good for the world. That's a question without a clean answer. What's undeniable is that the AK-47 transformed warfare. Professional armies had to adapt their strategies because insurgents could now sustain campaigns indefinitely. Superpowers discovered that technology alone couldn't guarantee victory against poorly equipped but determined opponents. Small nations could arm their populations with reliable rifles without depending on foreign suppliers for ongoing maintenance. The balance of military power shifted, not because weapons became more powerful, but because reliable weapons became universally available. The technological evolution after the AK-47 reveals its influence. When Western manufacturers designed new rifles, they increasingly incorporated elements of Kalashnikov's philosophy. The American M16 was eventually refined to be more reliable than its original design. The British SA-80 incorporated gas piston systems inspired by the AK. Even the latest rifles designed in the 21st century retain the tilting bolt concept that Kalashnikov pioneered. Modern designers might use advanced materials and computer-aided design, but they're still building on principles established in that Soviet workshop in 1947. One remarkable fact: the AK-47 holds the record as the deadliest rifle in history. Estimates suggest that more people have been killed by AK pattern rifles than by any other firearm. This isn't because the rifle was particularly effective at killing. Any rifle is lethal in trained hands. It's simply because more people have carried AK pattern rifles than any other gun, and across more conflicts spanning more decades. The rifle was present during colonial wars, Cold War proxy conflicts, nationalist uprisings, civil wars, terrorist attacks, and criminal violence. The sheer volume of history it's been part of means the cumulative death toll is staggering. But another statistic is equally important. The AK-47 is also responsible for saving more lives than perhaps any other rifle. Soldiers equipped with reliable AK-47s survived ambushes that would have killed them if their weapons had failed. Civilians in conflict zones who could access an AK-47 could defend themselves and their families against attackers who might otherwise have gone unchallenged. Insurgent forces armed with AK-47s successfully resisted occupying powers and oppressive regimes. The same rifle that enabled atrocities also enabled resistance to atrocities. This moral ambiguity is uncomfortable, but it's essential to understanding Kalashnikov's legacy. The rifle itself is neutral. What matters is human intention. The AK-47 became the rifle of liberation because it was reliable enough to be trusted by those with minimal training and few resources. It also became the rifle of oppression for exactly the same reasons. The design didn't distinguish between just causes and unjust ones. It simply functioned. Mikhail Kalashnikov died in 2013 at the age of 94. In his final years, he expressed something like regret about the uses to which his rifle had been put. But he also expressed pride in the engineering achievement. He had solved a genuine problem: how to create a rifle that ordinary soldiers in difficult circumstances could depend on. He solved it brilliantly. That others used his solution for purposes he didn't endorse is the burden that comes with creating something genuinely transformative. The AK-47's influence extends beyond warfare. It became a cultural icon in ways that few weapons have. It appeared in propaganda posters. It featured on national flags and military emblems. It represented power to those who had none, and became a symbol of resistance to imperial powers. In popular culture, it became the rifle that embodied revolution and insurgency, wherein American rifles represented military might and established order. The AK-47 represented the voice of the voiceless. This cultural significance reveals something important about how technology shapes society. A rifle is just metal and mechanics. But when that rifle becomes synonymous with successful resistance, when it enables people with few resources to challenge powerful enemies, when it represents the possibility of standing up to oppression, then it becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a symbol of hope or fear, depending on which side you stand on. As we move further into the 21st century, the AK-47's practical dominance in global conflicts has been challenged by more modern designs. Many developed nations have moved to rifles with better accuracy, better ergonomics, and better integration with modern accessories. But in developing nations, in conflict zones, and in the hands of irregular forces, the AK-47 and its countless variants remain the gold standard. The rifles are cheaper, more abundant, and more reliable than newer alternatives. Breaking the AK-47's dominance would require not just better guns, but a transformation in global economics and conflict patterns. And that's unlikely to happen soon. There are an estimated 100 million AK pattern rifles in the world. Some are in military arsenals, carefully maintained. Others are in the hands of civilians in countries where these weapons are legal to own. Still others are in the hands of warlords, insurgents, and criminals in regions where weapons flow outside any legal framework. Each of these 100 million rifles is potentially capable of functioning for decades, maybe centuries, if maintained minimally. The AK-47's legacy isn't just historical, it's actively shaping the world we live in today. What makes Kalashnikov's achievement remarkable isn't that he created the most powerful or most accurate rifle. It's that he created a rifle that matched the world it would enter. In an era of global conflicts where wealthy superpowers faced poorly equipped insurgents, he designed a weapon that leveled the playing field. Not by making it better than expensive, sophisticated alternatives, but by making it reliable enough that simplicity became a virtue. His insight was counterintuitive. Precision wasn't the goal. Tolerance was the goal. Accuracy mattered less than reliability. Sophistication mattered less than simplicity. Those principles seem obvious now, but they represented a complete rejection of the design philosophy that had dominated rifle design for a century. Most designers sought to make components fit together perfectly. Kalashnikov did the opposite. This design philosophy has applications far beyond firearms. In any field where products need to function in harsh conditions with minimal maintenance, Kalashnikov's approach of embracing tolerance over precision proves valuable. It's why Toyota vehicles are famous for reliability in difficult environments. It's why many industrial machines prioritize simplicity over sophistication. It's why emergency equipment is often designed with crude tolerances and simple mechanisms, because that's what keeps things functioning when conditions are worst. The AK-47 represents the moment when reliability transcended accuracy as the primary goal of design. This shift was so fundamental that it influenced not just subsequent weapons, but manufacturing philosophy across numerous industries. Companies that wanted their products to survive harsh conditions and minimal maintenance started asking, how can we design for tolerance instead of precision? How can we make something that works when everything else is failing? That question, and more than any specific feature of the rifle itself, is Kalashnikov's true legacy. He didn't invent new technologies. He didn't develop revolutionary manufacturing techniques. He did something more fundamental. He changed how engineers thought about designing for reliability. That shift in philosophy rippled far beyond firearms, influencing product design across the 20th century. In the end, the story of the AK-47 is a story about how engineering solutions are inseparable from their historical context. Mikhail Kalashnikov couldn't have designed a rifle better suited to the Cold War if he'd tried. His creation emerged exactly when a weapon of that type was needed most. A rifle simple enough to spread globally, reliable enough to win in conditions where expensive alternatives failed, standardized enough to become universal. These weren't lucky accidents. They were the product of Kalashnikov understanding, at a deep level, what kind of weapon would actually matter in the conflicts ahead. The rifle that began as sketches by an injured tank mechanic became the instrument of global conflict. It armed freedom fighters and despots. It enabled resistance and facilitated atrocity. It saved lives and took lives in numbers difficult to comprehend. It remains, more than 75 years after its design, the most recognizable and most widely used rifle on Earth. And at its core, it's a reminder that the greatest engineering achievements often come not from pursuing sophistication, but from solving fundamental problems with elegant simplicity. If you want to see more stories about how individual achievements shape history, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.